Okay, so I'm going to move on now and invite our next friend who's already been commenting, Steve Ostler from Blackboard, which I'm excited to have join us because I know they're doing a lot of groovy new stuff. And I've known Chris O'Neill forever. So, Steve, over to you. Share forth.
All right. Well, thank you, and what a nice introduction. I will say the presentation Central Bucks did, I just was eating it up. So it's hard to tell them to stop because it was so good. But we are really excited to be here. Really glad that Chris is going to join me here as well. We've got some slides I think Chris is going to pull up here, but just wanted to give a brief introduction to our team. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing at Blackboard over their K-12 operations. And Chris is one of our best solutions engineers. He actually comes from within education. Chris, how many years were you a teacher again?
A very long time.
more
we'll go with that. Leilani and I went to high school together, which was only 5 years ago. So.
Well said. Well said.
I just want you to know I see your slides, so I'm going to go on mute.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. Well, I like I say, we're really excited to be here and to get to share some information with this group. I invited Chris along to share some of his insights in how we support that shift to digital and effective online teaching and learning. As we look at the events of the last year, I think everyone is excited to get back to classes in person. Get students back into brick and mortar classrooms. The good news is I think we're getting there. We're getting there really quickly. But the challenge that remains is that the last year really exposed a lot of the other challenges in terms of how do we reach every student effectively? How do we make sure that teaching and learning is equitable? How do we communicate with our broader community? And there are a lot of lessons learned from the last year that I think will improve education, not just in the next year, but I think has fundamentally changed the way we approach education. So I'm excited to have Chris here with us today, though, to share some of those best practices. And I don't want to eat up too much of his time. So Chris, go ahead and take it away. And thank you for joining us.
Great. And thanks everyone for having us. And Steve, can you just confirm that you can see my slide screen?
I'm in a different view, so I don't see them.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. Right, cool.
It's you and Steve's pictures right now. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, I'll stop my video too, just so I can really speak to the slides and not distract my own self. What the first district shared really was just phenomenal, because I feel like that's what we have done internally the last year, is worked with school districts on all those struggles, and then how can we be a resource for those successes. So I thought I would kind of speak from a leadership standpoint. Prior to coming to Blackboard, I was a district administrator myself, and also taught hybrid classes. So a big piece of what we did internally at Blackboard was also, well, then how do we shift gears and make sure we're providing the right resources and the right training and right webinars and things like that. I feel like this slide is really kind of speaks to what all of us probably felt as the year progressed. If we knew then what we know now, what would we have done, particularly in a couple different areas: remote instructional needs, SEL type issues that we probably had a good handle on inside the building, but remotely are pretty tough to handle. Teacher BD support, of course, which all of us did a great job of that in traditional sense, but then we were kind of thrown, of course, off kilter, having to rethink, well, what does professional development look like then, not just for good instructional practices, but with all these brand new hurdles that we typically might not have faced. And then parental communications and guidance. What does that now look like when we're not physically in a building and parents aren't coming to pick up their students and things like that? How do we then communicate, and how do we keep tabs on that? What I think has been kind of interesting, and I've done some of this actually with ISTE in the past, is rethinking about your past school year, almost kind of a rubric that you build yourself that does some self-analysis for whatever role you're in: curriculum leader, superintendent, tech coordinator, thinking through, how did I grow this past year? in what areas do I still need help and new strategies? Maybe I was really, I came out of the classroom and I was a phenomenal instructional leader in the building, but just because of other priorities, maybe I didn't pay as much attention to distance learning and what quality distance learning looked like in middle school, for example. So things that we might not have faced before. So one of the strategies that we have used at ISTE and internally at Blackboard is building your own rubric for assessing myself against a couple of things. A personal reflection, meaning how did I handle this from my own personal standpoint in my role, but also school-wide feedback from teachers. Sometimes, and I've been a teacher, so sometimes we're the most brutal because we're in the trenches. So if you ask me to give you feedback on, how things went, I'm probably going to tell you, here's exactly how things went and how I wish they would go if we do this again. And then, of course, parental surveys and parental feedback. So a few questions that I want to pose to the group, and again, you don't have to answer now, but feel free to answer in chat if you want, or at least just for us to think about, is how do we assist teachers then? And one of the first things I think is super critical is envisioning learners outside the classroom. And I will tell you this, even though I haven't taught for a long time, I can tell you exactly how my 4th grade classroom was set up and my 7th grade classroom. I remember why I put posters in the location I did. I remember why I put the trash can in the location I did. So it's really easy for me to describe my physical classroom, even though I haven't been in it in years, in very in vivid detail. But if you ask us as teachers, how do you picture a home learning environment? All 25 home learning environments are drastically different. You have no idea where posters are, or if there is even an opportunity for a dry erase board. Or like what a couple of people were saying at the beginning, the way we set up our teaching end of it too is drastically different. Our laptop might be connected to a really cool second monitor, or it might be stacked on 6 magazines and the same USB camera that came with my laptop years ago. So you never know what the teaching environment might look like, but then also the home learner environment, and thinking through, how do I visualize that remotely? What does it look like if I can't move my personal classroom whiteboard into the perfect spot? Things like that. I also think, again, what really shone through last year, I'm a big watcher of Twitter. I don't tweet that often, but I have a lot of good hashtags and filters set up so I can see what's being discussed. And it was phenomenal, the rallying that we all did, the whole education community. Teachers really just rose up like superstars, really, and said, by the way, I didn't think anybody would care about this rubric before, but I decided to post it. And then all of a sudden, 50 teachers were all saying, oh my gosh, I never saw a rubric like this. This is phenomenal, or whatever resource it is. Same thing for resources, learning councils, ongoing resources, EduJedi, and the webinars and these meetings prior to virtual face-to-face ones, as well as some of my just personal favorites. Obviously, Edutopia is a really good one. ISTE, Blackboard, we do a ton of webinars, and a lot of these are from requests. So it isn't just that we're saying, oh, let's just, share this new product, but we have a ton of requests in our Blackboard community that are things like, can we talk about setting up authentic assessment in a virtual classroom? Could you get some best practices from other middle school teachers on how they taught language and oral fluency remotely? And so I think really harnessing the power of what's there and doing some searching and some asking for, I don't have time to recreate the wheel, so let me lean on these people who this is what they do, I think also kind of forcing us to reflect on our role now as still teaching, but also instructional designing. So I had these great resources that were phenomenal when I physically moved from a table to table to table in my classroom. What's the virtual view of that? Do my same assessment activities transfer well to 25 different homes and virtually, or some of us in the fall hybrid? Am I thinking through this lesson works so well whenever I can physically move my 4th graders into groups? What is that going to look like virtually? How am I going to float from group to group? How am I going to make sure group A is on task the way that I might have done in a face-to-face classroom? What does that look like virtually? This one I feel like is, for me personally, one of the most important ones. I really loved teaching both elementary and middle school, and my classroom vibe was something that I really felt proud of because I used a lot of humor, a lot of storytelling, lots of notes to parents all the time, just wanted to say, Leilani did this great thing today, or I was really proud of the way Doug shared today, or whatever. But small notes that I want to communicate outward very regularly, because I always felt bad if the only communication parents got was a progress report, which may or may not, be a true reflection of how they were doing in class. The other piece, though, that I worried about whenever I started teaching virtually was, again, my classroom vibe. Could I still be funny? What if what I thought was really fun middle school sarcastic humor that kids totally got face to face, is that going to sound appropriate remotely? Are they going to get that I'm just joking around? Will they know that this is kind of the LOL moment? So how do I transfer that into a virtual environment? Is it more videos? Is it more storytelling? Is it a combo of my LMS and Bitmojis and, again, parent communications? How can I make sure that I don't lose what is specific to me? Because for me as a teacher and everybody else as a teacher, we might be teaching the same, let's say, fourth grade curriculum, but we're not the same teacher. We're all great for what we do. And how do we not lose that in a remote or hybrid environment? I feel like that's just so critical. The other that is more logistically focused is, what does a remote workspace look like? So for me, maybe as an ed tech nerd, and I don't have young children at home, I have my cool little nerdy setup with 2 monitors and a fun Bluetooth speaker. But whenever I did have a younger child, there's no way it would have been like that. It probably would have been, Legos on the same table that my laptop is on, as well as, a sandwich. So I think thinking through, not only from your teacher's standpoint, how do we support them? How do we supply them if that's possible? But are we able to ask them, do you have, to the best of your ability, do you have a remote setup that works for you? But then at the same time is, what is the student's remote work setup? Because it's highly unlikely that a student sitting there with a laptop and 2 monitors and a Bluetooth speaker, and they're probably sharing a laptop between 2 siblings, and their workspace is the kitchen table with 2 other kids who might be fighting with each other while the parent is also about to lose it and say, okay, everybody stop talking. So visualizing what makes the best remote environment for me as a teacher, and then what also makes the best remote environment to the extent we can for the students. I think this one is a critical one that's a much harder nut to crack. And I think through this about, particularly more so probably whenever I taught middle school, how do those students learn in the room? And there might be learning styles and multiple intelligences, and those things that we all went to school to learn about. But the way those play out in a physical classroom is drastically different than what might be on a checklist of intelligence types. So I think thinking about, how do these students learn in school, and now what does that look like remotely? How do I accommodate or compensate for this student who is super fidgety, but a great writer, but doesn't seem excited by, social studies or wherever the topic? The other is, I don't know these students physically the way that I might typically know them. So how do I support these students knowing that I might know nothing about their background or their home life or what they came to this remote environment with? Because normally I'd be in the building and I could go talk to the prior year's teachers and meet the parents and physically get to know these kids really quickly. But that's a whole different strategy remotely. So how do I think through not only that, but the inclusion and diversity angle of, am I doing activities that represent my diverse student population, even though I might not see them? Am I thinking through accessibility challenges that might not be documented, not necessarily a 504 or an IEP, but what about just students who might unintentionally be excluded from an activity based on home equipment, or based on a potential accessibility issue. So I think these are also critical points that I feel a little harder to measure, but equally critical. The last piece, I think, from the leadership standpoint really is, how do we manage this then? And one of the things that came through loud and clear to us, Steve and me and the K-12 Blackboard team, was everybody's so overwhelmed and it takes so much more time than you would think. So what happened with us on some of the webinars that I did and some of the training workshops and things would be teachers that would come to these and say, I'll be totally honest, I thought I was going to, open up my LMS class and kind of transfer stuff. And I'd be like, cool, I'm going to do that this weekend. And what the reality was like, oh my gosh, I'm basically rebuilding an entire educational infrastructure because, number one, maybe I've never used an LMS, or things that worked really well face-to-face, didn't work as well as I thought remotely. So I think it's critical for leadership teams to be really cognizant of blocking out time for educators, not just official PD and workshops, but really, this is downtime for you. This is reading time, or this is share time. The other is realistic expectations. Those expectations, I think, rose as the school year progressed, but that was a really tough one for school leadership. What are realistic expectations? We want to establish, some protocol for you communicate with parents. What is that expectation? Every day, twice a week, you have live sessions with students. What's realistic there? Is it 2 30-minute chunks a week or 6 hours a week? The other is the bigger picture of this school district and how it reacted to what we were all thrown in. How did parents react? How did the community react? Based on that, how do we have to be proactive and not just reactive to those issues? The fourth one, and then I'll start wrapping up, is thinking outside the box. As corny as that always sounds, is what does remote engagement look like? And sometimes it really does look like you are taking an LMS-based test that auto grades itself, and that serves a really functional purpose. But sometimes it also looks like I need to measure oral fluency, and there's no way to do that unless I get this 9-year-old on the phone with me and I just say, I want to have this conversation with you. Or look on your printout or paper or LMS. I want you to look at this paragraph and I want the student to read it to me. And there's just no other way to assess, in my view anyway, certain things like that aren't just teacher voice and student voice in the same medium live. And sometimes, again, that's hard to do remotely, and it doesn't sometimes lend itself to a traditional technology piece. But I think helping teachers think that way and then enabling them to be able to do those things is critical too, which then leads into this last bullet, really, is maximizing whatever the learning experience is. I still need, and again, kind of speaking more with my former elementary hat on, I still need to be really convinced of student performance before I move that student on. And again, sometimes that's a summative weekly test, and other times it's a formative check-in quiz. Other times it's a virtual exit ticket. So helping all of us think through what do these things look like, whether we're fully face-to-face this fall or hybrid. Either way, we've learned through this to say there are lessons learned this past year that we don't disregard, that are still applicable, that actually kind of opened up our bigger picture and bigger thinking about teaching and learning. A couple resources, and I'll turn it back over to Steve. I do want to make people aware of the Blackboard community. It isn't just help in technical kinds of things. It really is a community of practitioners where we all go in there and share best practices, and not unlike those topics I was just saying. How do we assess oral fluency remotely? Help me think of some cool ways for that. So you'll find a lot of topics in that. Obviously, you already know about the Learning Council. You're here, but they're phenomenal resources, virtually and digital print. EdSurge is one of my favorite newsletter type resources, and I've mentioned Edutopia and ISTE as organizations to follow and join as well. So on that note, I appreciate you all kind of letting us chat with you this afternoon, and I'll switch it back, I think, to Steve O for the slide, the Blackboard Unite slide.
Fantastic. And Chris, thank you so much. I know we've talked about this a lot, and every time you share this, I always pull out, 2 or 3 more just great little nuggets. So I appreciate you taking the time today to join us and share this. Just in closing, I just wanted to say that, all of the things that Chris just talked about are so important, not just to educators working directly with students and parents and communities, but also to us here at Blackboard. Education is absolutely in our DNA. We are passionate about helping each of you effectively reach every student, effectively teach every student, effectively bring together all the stakeholders in education. As part of that effort, and especially during the pandemic of last year, we actually put together a new package of products we call Blackboard Unite. It's probably at the high level, the best way to think of it is that it's kind of everything you need to effectively bring together online education. So that includes a learning management system, that includes that interactive online virtual classroom tool. It includes a new tool, Blackboard Reach, which is designed to facilitate school and home conversations in real time, in two-way dialogue. It also includes branded district mobile app that can be used as a consolidated single source portal for all the information that parents and students need to effectively navigate their education. And all of this is built on a platform of accessibility tools. Ally is a fantastic suite of tools that make sure that all of your classroom content, digital content is accessible to everyone. And of course, the training, integration, and backend support to make sure that you are successful in using all of these tools. In short, it's everything you need to effectively reach every student. And we're just excited to have that available. And if you're struggling with any piece of that, we would be happy to talk to you and see how we can help you in your districts as you do that valuable work. So with that, I guess I will close up. Leilani, we'll pass the microphone back to you. And thank you to everybody for sharing this time with us. We appreciate it. Appreciate everything you do.
Okay, well, I do have one question for you guys before you go, Chris and Steve, and that is, what's happened with just the traffic that you've seen since the start of the pandemic? Because I know you guys are out there a lot like us, just talking to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've actually been tracking that really closely. Huge increases in online classroom usage in our virtual collaboration tool. We've seen massive spikes of usage. Clearly, those tools are helping teachers and students connect. To give you an idea of the scale, I mean, over 10 times the usage as we've seen for the last decades, and obviously triggered by the pandemic. But we've also seen, tied to that, some other interesting increases. We've seen huge increases in the amount and types of communication outreach that schools in school districts are doing to reach parents and students. Again, similarly, 10 and 14 times the number of phone calls and text messages and emails and website visits over the last year than we've seen traditionally. All of that is, from our perspective, is interesting from a product view, if you will. But what it really means to us is that there is such a huge need for that kind of communication, for that kind of connection in a virtual space. And that's really what's important to us, is how do we make sure that the tools aren't just, they're not tools for tool's sake, but that they're actually driving those connections. They're actually helping students stay engaged, that they're actually helping parents stay on top of what's happening in this crazy new world of virtual and remote and hybrid learning that so many of us are in. So the last thing I will just say, I mentioned it a little bit as part of Unite, but Blackboard Reach, it's a two-way communication tool, really was designed to facilitate not just a one-way notification like many of us are used to, those traditional snow day calls or your student was absent. We see that as useful. That information is definitely helpful to parents and students. But what we really need is a two-way dialogue. So when I'm sitting at the computer with my daughter at the end of the day, and we're trying to noodle through her math homework, and we're both just stumped. What we need is that lifeline to reach out to a teacher and say, hey, can you help us out here? We're stuck. Or for a teacher to reach out and say, hey, you know what? I've noticed that Sophie is really struggling with this. Why don't you take some time? Here's something you might try. Those are the kind of connections that we see really powering student success. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to see more than anything. So we're excited to launch that and see that get picked up and used a lot more too.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, that's really critical. And we were even hearing superintendents early on say, the teachers are fielding calls at 11 o'clock at night. It's crazy.
Yes.
So, yeah. So some of them were like, you got to stop doing that, so you life. But here's my last question before you run off. And hopefully maybe you guys can stay on all day to listen to some of the other speakers. But, there's a lot of newbies that have entered in, and then also the older accounts that you guys have been working with for a really long time. What has been your experience with these random calls coming in of, I need this done, I need the system to do this? So then your engineers and your software developers at the back end massively working on all these new features and functions, because as people get into something, they're like, you know what? We have schedules that are crazy, like AB days, AB weeks, different blocks of times, like everybody moved, like almost everybody moved, like we're not going to do Carnegie units anymore. We're going to have a 120-minute unit for this, but you can only be on Zoom call for 20 minutes of the 120. The rest has to be asynchronous. So like it was the Wild West, and it affected the way the calendar would manifest. And then it also affected all the lesson planning. So what has been your experience then? Have you heard from your engineers like, oh my gosh, they're swamped?
Every day. And I'll let Chris, you're probably more in the trenches than I am on a lot of those, but I will just say some of the things that we've seen, at least on the back end, the requests that are coming in really are designed around how do we track engagement? How do we make sure that, we've got a classroom of 30 kids maybe in some Zoom room, or preferably in a Blackboard tool, but they're in some virtual space. How do we make sure that they're actually learning, and how do we address the individual needs of every student? Not every student does really well in a virtual classroom for hours and hours. Like you mentioned, 20 minutes maybe. So we're seeing a lot of things around how do we build in tools to that virtual learning space that trigger engagement, that trigger interaction. I will just say we have gotten a lot of, let's just call them interesting requests. At the end of the day, the thing that we really have to look at is, again, it comes back to that engagement and student success. Is a specific request, is it just something fun to do? And we like to do the fun to do things too. Or is it actually something that truly will drive engagement? Is it something that truly will make a parent's life easier as they try and manage their students' experience in school? Is it something that truly makes it easier for teachers and administrators to understand what's happening in that space? So, it's, I will just say, I really applaud the creativity of so many teachers and administrators out there who are, in this crazy last year that we've had, have gone above and beyond to find creative ways to make sure that, no kid gets left in the shadows, nobody falls through the cracks. All I can do is just applaud, a huge round of applause for every educator. I don't know a single educator that hasn't been doing that.
Yeah, small miracles every day.
Every day.
Chris, any last comments?
No, I think that's probably the one thing. I would say the biggest request or nervousness, I think, from teachers really was that I am a great pro in my classroom. Sorry, there's sirens going off. I'm a great pro in my classroom of instruction, keeping tabs on student needs, both physical, instructional, social, emotional. How in the world am I supposed to do that remotely? That was one of the biggest conversations, and help me find resources, help me feel assured that I can still do that because I'm passionate about what I do and I don't want that to be lost over the wires, so to speak. So it's been fun for me because I love, live for helping teachers. So it's been a wacky year for them, and same as Steve-O. I just completely can't applaud enough for the work that school leadership and school teachers have done.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you guys both for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.